I'm very delighted to be chairing this session. As was said, a world without poverty is a topic that's very dear and near to my heart, as it is to, I'm sure, all of you. And it would be absolutely wonderful if we could actually achieve that. What I wanted to do at this session was really to kind of take a few minutes to set the stage for the discussion. And then we obviously have some very qualified panelists here to speak about the topic. I can see there are quite a few qualified people in the audience here too, so I may cold call you during the session. So since it's after lunch, you better be wide awake and listen clearly. So setting the context for the discussion, what I wanted to use was the United Nations Millennium Goals. And just to kind of say where we have been in terms of the poverty alleviation agenda and where we hopefully are going and what the challenges are. So as you know, the United Nations had set up their Millennium Goals, which was focused on reducing extreme poverty. And at that time, the poverty was defined as anyone whose consumption level was less than $1.25 on a purchasing power parity basis. And if you look at the history of the achievement that has been achieved by those, the last 10, 12 years, it actually has been quite phenomenal in terms of extreme poverty reduction. Gone down, based on the estimates I saw, from about 1.9 billion people living in extreme poverty to less than 900. So a reduction of 1 billion people moving out of the extreme poverty kind of arena, if you will. And not only that, but the statistics of the lower 30-40% of the economic activity in people really progressing much more. If you look at some other benchmarks like child malnutrition, healthcare, education, significant improvements in all of those. And India has achieved, has been part of that achievement. Clearly, the poverty alleviation agenda here has been very strong. But there remains a lot to be done. The World Bank just released a report which said that as of now, 700 million people still live in extreme poverty. That's 1 in 7 people in the world. So that's one kind of statistic. The other thing that's changed from the last, from the last time this was looked at in 2010, in 2000, was the fact that the concentration of the poverty now is highly in South Asia and in sub-Saharan Africa. So about 10, 15 years ago, you had most of the concentration in Africa, in India, but also in China and other parts of Asia. And because of the growth in those countries, things have kind of moved to the right side. So 700 million people, of which the estimate is that 250 million of those people are in India. The percentage of people who are in extreme poverty is high in sub-Saharan Africa, but by far, in India has the largest number of people in extreme poverty. So everyone kind of now recognizes this. The United Nations now has just set up a sustainable development agenda, again, with the objective that fighting extreme poverty and eliminating it by 2030 is a highest priority. So the question really is, what do you do about it? And that's why we're here. We're here to discuss and debate this. We obviously can't solve this in an hour, but hopefully we can get to some points which can be taken away from the meeting over here for future debate. So with that, I will say that if we don't solve the poverty problem in India, that the Millennium Goal or the Sustainable Development Goal is just not going to be met. We're going to have the two speakers talk for about 10 minutes. I'm going to request Rajiv, who is an old friend of mine and colleague from Morgan Stanley a long time ago, to really perhaps focus on, Rajiv, on, from an India perspective, you've had an impact investing platform, you've had a variety of roles. How do you see the key issues in solving this issue? And then, Carlos, I'd request you to not only talk about the India experience, but given your role in the United Nations, how have you seen it and how do you see it playing out going forward?
Thank you. Do you want me to? Yeah, okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. So thank you, Vikram. As you're right, we're not going to eradicate poverty. As you are right, we are not going to eradicate poverty in the next hour. And this is such a rich topic for discussion that perhaps it would be useful if I really shared with you a particular perspective on poverty reduction, which to my mind would also be in tune, if you like, with the changing of the guard since the new government has come in India. What do I mean by that? To set the context, maybe I'll spend a couple of minutes just reminding people of what broadly we have learned about what it takes to reduce poverty over the last 50 years from the experience of countries that have most recently been most successful in this endeavor. So these countries are primarily in East Asia, and that their experience after the war, after the Second War, has been much written about. And then more recently, it's really been China. So the economic literature on poverty reduction over these 50, 60 years really points to 3 or 4 things. First is it has required sustained investment in education, particularly primary education, as a very essential feature for those economies that have been really successful in bringing down poverty. Second is sustained and significant investment in public health. The third is investment in physical infrastructure. And the fourth is generally facilitation, enablement of a trade-focused transition from agriculture to manufacturing. Those are the 4 key components of the transformations of all the economies that have really been successful over the last 6, 7 decades. So whether it's South Korea, whether it's Taiwan, in a somewhat different context, Malaysia, and then China. It started with Japan, and then the Chinese experience. Within this universe of countries, it's interesting that none of them, when they embarked on this journey, were representative democracies. I know this is not directly perhaps the subject of this session's discussion, but I think it's extremely important to connect the narrative here with the conversations we were having in the morning about the nature of politics and what it means. The point was made about India this morning, that we are a country that received democracy all at once. I think Jay Panda made that point this morning, right? But actually, the more nuanced aspect of that argument is the following. Not only did we receive democracy as in universal suffrage all at once, we received it at a point in our economic evolution that was much more nascent than any other successful democracy in the world. So to give you a sense, this is in purchasing power parity dollars. India's GDP per capita today is the same as was in the United States in 1880. In 1880, in purchasing power terms, right? But the share of GDP that we allocate from the budget on transfers and social spending in the form of subsidies and social support programs of various kinds is the same as in the US in 1965. You can actually plot this for various countries. You can do this for France, you can do this for UK, and it's really fascinating. The share of budgetary spending that goes on transfers and social spending increases dramatically from the point each of these countries become totally representative democracies, from the time they receive universal suffrage, which for the United Kingdom was back in the 1920s sometime. In the United States, they didn't get universal suffrage actually till after the Civil Rights Movement in 1964. We, in fact, got universal suffrage even before that. Point being that the political logic of any representative system makes some form of economic inclusion absolutely imperative. It becomes a political compunction that has to be delivered in the short term. And if you cannot deliver it through growth or other means, right, then you have to do it through transfers. So in that sense, our battle against poverty, and I'll explain why it's important, is that much harder, right? And our dependence on the raw dynamics and the brutal dynamics of a capitalist, market-driven economy are much harder to navigate than was the case for any successful democracy, than was the case for any of the countries that actually were very successful in reducing poverty dramatically over the last 7-8 decades. Because we have to balance the compunctions of representative politics with the compunctions of building the sinews and the foundations for a market-driven economy in a manner that none of them had to. So that's the first point I wanted to share with you. Second point I wanted to make is now going back to the subset of countries that I talked about that over the last 7 decades have reduced poverty dramatically. There are differences between them. So you take a South Korea, for example, versus the People's Republic of China. I have the data only for those two at hand. Through its transformation, South Korea saw very little deterioration in income inequality. Quite remarkable for a country that doesn't have representative politics, didn't have representative politics, right? In China, on the other hand, and this is measured through the Gini coefficient, which has remained more or less constant in the mid-30s or some such for Korea throughout the period. In fact, since Korea has become a better functioning democracy, its Gini coefficient has actually improved because they have allocated much more to social spending, right? Now you take China. Since they embarked on their reforms in the mid-1970s, there has been a systematic deterioration in the Gini coefficient, and a very serious one. So they were, if memory serves, they were 0.29 in the late 70s, Gini coefficient. This has deteriorated to something like 0.47. Right? So why is there this difference between China and Korea? Politically, neither of them had representative democracies when they embarked on this journey. Yet, Korea was able to deliver a transformation with very little deterioration in inequality, whereas China didn't do that. Korea didn't have the political compulsion to deliver equality, but they managed to deliver it because they invested very heavily in universal access to quality education. So there is a concept of an education Gini, equality of access to education. And Korea attacked that very dramatically. And they created equality of opportunity and participation in the transforming economy that allowed income levels to rise in a much more even manner across society than the Chinese have done. So the Chinese have not had to pay the price for this deteriorating inequality, because they don't have political accountability in the same way that we do. So what does this mean for India, which, as you say, is a third of global absolute poverty?
And 20% of Indian population is
Correct.
living in extreme poverty.
So you cannot have a world without poverty unless you attack poverty in our country. Now, here are the broad numbers in India. I don't want to get into any methodological disputes, of which there are many. But everything is relative. So the orders of magnitude, I think, in relative terms is what we should focus on. Over the last 30 years, since 1991, when we embarked on economic reforms, quote unquote, poverty measured in terms of per capita consumption has come down dramatically. So 45% of the Indian population in 1993 was below the poverty line. By 2005, it was down to 37%. We are down in 2012 to 22%. So despite our dysfunctional politics that we talked about this morning, and despite all the cacophony of negative energy that we live in a very noisy, argumentative India, the objective empirical fact is that we have, as a country, delivered very substantial decline in poverty levels. That's the good news. The bad news, or the challenging news, is, and you can ask, it comes from the question, is this enough? Obviously, absolute poverty reduction continues to be a very, very major priority for us as a nation. But increasingly, it's our performance relative to rising aspirations that is becoming an even bigger challenge. So it's not going to be enough for us to meet some, questionable benchmark, around which there are measurement debates anyway, that you reduce absolute poverty in terms of consumption to this percentage of the population. For a country that is so young, demographically so young as ours, that in itself is not going to be enough. We will have to do more. So I want to now come to my concluding comments, and the question is, what do we do about it? And here there is a legitimate debate between the left and the right. So the left narrative on poverty reduction is that developing and investing in a safety net for the poor is equally, if not more important, than focusing on growth. I guess in the narrative of the left, at least, the more extreme end of the spectrum, if there were a trade-off between growth and social protection, there would be greater emphasis on the latter versus the former. We can debate whether there is a trade-off or not. I don't want to get into that debate, but that's the general inclination of the left. The right's narrative ought to be, isn't clearly articulated though, enough in my view in our country, is that delivering opportunity and equality of opportunity should be of paramount importance. And if there were a trade-off between transfers for social protection and growth, then the inclination of the right would be to err on the side of growth. Because a rising tide lifts all boats, it's better to focus on delivering growth rather than to try and redistribute a pie that is not growing. Right?
If I may just interrupt 1 second, Rajiv. We have our fourth panelist, our guest speaker here, Victor. Nice to meet you. Please welcome.
Hi, Victor. Yeah. The experience that we have had, successful as it is in reducing headline poverty over the last 40 years, has now arguably reached its limits. The surest way of reducing poverty or eliminating poverty and delivering on the aspirations of a young India is through job creation. And this one statistic will tell you the limits of the approach of the left. Over the last 30 years, the organized sector employment has grown only from 26.5 million to 30 million. And the share in the organized sector of government jobs has stayed more or less constant at 19 million. Right? The point is that the state cannot create the jobs that are needed to pull people out of poverty. It's the private sector that has to drive those jobs. That's point number one. Point number two is that what we have seen in the last 20, 30 years, that the organized large private sector, big business, has not been creating the jobs. The job creating machine that needs absolute revitalization for us to win the battle against poverty is the small businessman. So that is the single point agenda, if you like, for us, at least from my perspective. If we want to deliver India without poverty, we have to do what it takes to empower, enable, unleash the job-creating capacity of small business.
No, that's great, Rajiv. Before I go to Carlos, can I just ask you for one comment, just so that, is it really, for example, if you look at the clearly job creation, you're right, the track record, the trend, and the aspiration aspect. But if you're looking at extreme poverty, a guy who's earning the 125, doesn't they need a safety net? I mean, is it an either or is it additive that you've got to do more of both?
No, so
Real quick.
You obviously have to do both. But again, it comes to a question of emphasis. So in the previous government, right, the narrative was about spending more on health and on education and on transfers, whether it's MNREGA or so on and so forth, all of which are essential, no doubt. There was never any conversation about how effective what we are spending is. And we heard indirectly this morning, Mr. Jayaprakash was telling us how dysfunctional our public education is. Do you know that our public sector teachers cost twice as much and are only half as productive as the comparable private sector teacher?
No, I guess the point I was trying to make is that subsidies and government spending cannot really go away. But what I think you're trying to say, or what they were saying this morning, is it's got to be made a lot more effective. But it's not in lieu of job creation. So
it's not in lieu of job creation,
exactly.
But it is so. It's making whatever public spending we are doing for support much more effective, and focusing the balance on facilitating job creation.
And small business. Thank you. So Carlos, could I then request you to maybe give us a little international perspective? I mean, Rajiv did that very well too in terms of looking at the last 60, 70 years of Asia and China. But given your experience at the UN, since a lot of the kind of growth and the effectiveness of the reduction in poverty was from the Millennium Goals that were set by the UN, which seemed to bring the international development community together. Just your thoughts and experience on and what should we do in India?
Thank you, Vikram. And let me also express my gratitude to the organizers for inviting me for the second year in a row to participate in India Ideas Conclave. I think it's indeed a very good idea. You should think in exporting it. Additionally, I think this particular panel on the world without poverty is very challenging, very timely, and it is very important to have it here in India, because India has made a major contribution and has to make a big contribution to eradicate poverty by 2030, as was decided and adopted by United Nations member states during the deliberations a couple of months ago in New York. I think the poverty issue is itself a complex topic which has many dimensions, and we have to clarify a bit how the multilateral community tried to address it over this exercise of the Millennium Development Goals. And the first thing I would like to highlight probably is that the income poverty or the income dimension of poverty reflects probably one of the consequences of poverty. The lack of income is a consequence of poverty. The true and real root of poverty is the lack of assets, and therefore working on improving income tends not to be enough. You need to build assets at the same time, and this unveils the social dimension of poverty and all the issues so properly addressed by Rajiv with regard to education and health. And that was the idea of the Millennium Development Goals. At the moment I joined the United Nations at the end of 1987, and during 1988 there was large discussions on whether it was possible at all to have a list of quantitative goals to be adopted by the international community. I think it was a major move and a major change in the history of the United Nations. The organization was very much associated to big speeches and big objectives, but to some extent it was seen as unable to deliver. Well, I wouldn't say that it was the adoption of the Millennium Development Goals what finally helped it to halve poverty by half, because as Rajiv mentioned, certainly the growth of GDP was not a result of technical cooperation or the advocacy of poverty fighters only, but they played a role. They do play the role, and they will play a role by complementing several dimensions of economic growth in the fight against poverty. I think we have to look at the picture and take stock of the achievements very carefully, because in my view, the world is going through an epochal change. All of us, when we study at the university, we learned about the world divided between rich and poor countries, where developed countries were growing fast and they enjoyed better living standards. Well, already in 2013, the so-called underdeveloped countries or emerging economies, or however you want to call it, they contributed more than half of the world GDP at purchase power parity terms. This means those that were in the back seat are moving to the front seat. And this is at the same time cause and consequence of a very peculiar phenomenon, the emergence of a new global middle class. Measured by standards of people spending between $10 and $100 per day at purchase parity terms. Then we could see in 2010, 1.8 billion people living in middle class, 54% of them living in Europe and America. And in 2020, and we're well on track to reach that goal. In 2020, there will be 3.2 billion people living in middle class. Probably the world will be a middle class world, could be a middle class world for the first time ever. 54% of that people will be living in Asia. So it's a major shift, tectonic shift for the global economy. And I would say, additionally, that middle-class people that in the 20th century was very much represented by a typical urban guy working in a major corporation. At the difference of that, in the 21st century, they will very much look at a private entrepreneur. There's a typical middle-class person will be a private entrepreneur working in a very different society than the one we saw before. As I said, the Millennium Development Goals embodied goals for improving income and reducing poverty by those means, but also a number of goals related with the social dimension in education. And I would say a major step forward was achieved over the last 15 years, moving the enrollment rate worldwide from 83% to 91%. That's a major move. And we didn't achieve university primary education, but we are on track to get there. Child mortality, the goal on child mortality was to reduce it by 2/3. It was reduced by 1/2. Maternal mortality was also meant to be reduced by 2/3. It was reduced by 1/2 as well. I mean, major inroads on hunger were also made. And I think the international community, watching those results, grew stronger, more confident, and adopted even more Millennium Goals, or let's say Sustainable Development Goals, as they are called now, 2 months ago in New York. From 8 goals, we moved to 17 goals. And we got the ambition of eradicating poverty completely. Whether this is possible or not will depend very much on the path of economic growth of the global economy. There are many important steps to be taken. For example, the increase in official development aid to help the most remote quarters. We need to ensure that the economic growth process continue to be inclusive, as it was over the last years, and SMEs, entrepreneurship development has an important role to play, both domestically and globally. And we need to ensure that by those means we also reduce inequality. I will finish with that. I think at the same time, global inequality between countries converged in the sense that it was reduced. At the same time that happened, within countries, inequality increased. More than that, the same forces that help it to reduce inequality between nations are the forces which are increasing inequality locally. So we have a great deal of work to do. Governments had a lot to do with regard to policies, reducing red tape and improving economic performance. And I think that's the challenge to achieve the goals the global community adopted for 2030.
Yeah, no, I think the theme, though, I think what's coming out from both your comments is the importance of small business in really driving. But what about economic growth? I mean, before I come to you, sir, on economic growth, I mean, if you look at any projection of economic growth going forward, it's much lower than it was, say, the last 10 years. Do you think that is going to, what is the impact of that going to be, since so much of actual poverty alleviation is job creation and economic growth?
Well, I honestly think that the global economy went through a very singular period over the last 15 years. I do not think the emerging economies will continue growing so fast as they did over the last 15 years. And that's why it is very important to get more global leadership to unlock, for example, global trade agreements, to unlock environmental agreements, and to move towards a new stage of cooperation in trade and investment between the less developed countries and the more advanced economies. And it will be very important to move where, over the last 15 years, we moved very little, and where we did not produce results. If you look, I give you this figure to give you an idea on what I'm saying when I single out a very peculiar period of the global economy over the last 15 years. If you look at the rate of growth between 2003 and 2007, for the global economy, and you try to find out how many countries grew above 5% over that period, you will find 110 countries. Countries with left-wing governments, right-wing governments, landlocked countries, island countries, all of them, they grew above 5%.
If you didn't grow by 5%, you really sucked.
No, any other decade, you look back, any other decade, or 5 years, there was no more than 30, 35, 40 countries growing above 5%. So that's a challenge. That's a real challenge. We have to focus, and that's why it's so important to reduce red tape, to change the patterns under which private companies work. You need private companies taking the lead and playing a big role. And that's why United Nations, both in the Millennium Development Goals and now in the Sustainable Development Goals, they included one goal of global partnerships. It is expected for private sector and government to work together in the removal of barriers for growth, improving education, and a better cooperation at the end of the day is the only thing that will guarantee that breakaway countries will also pull the rope for those which are left behind.
Great, thank you. If I could just take a moment here to welcome our guest of honor again, welcome Mr. Vekselberg, who is joining us from Russia and is the president of the Skolkovo Foundation. Would you like to make a few comments, sir?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I would like to say thank you, my Indian friends who give me opportunity to take participation in this very interesting conference. Yeah, I believe that it's very important whereas reps of different countries to be able to meet and talk about the so important human issues. And I would like to use this opportunity to present like very shortly our Skolkovo project, what it is, and try to put some bridge between our project and the subject what you discuss of that session. Skolkovo, it's name of very small village, it's next to Moscow. It's a really small village, there where lives like a few hundred people. And 5 years ago, the Russian government decided to start project to build innovation center. Really, this is to build like small innovation city, which will be to build ecosystem to support to innovation company, to support to develop innovation idea and to try to turn Russian economy from significant dependability of raw material industry to different corner. Russia dedicated 400 hectares for that project, dedicated some money, around like $3 billion, and we start to develop of that innovation center. And today we achieve some serious result, and to build, I think, almost basic platform to develop in the future. What our idea is we would like to create this ecosystem which consists of 5 key elements. One is it should be university of modern style we created, which calls Skoltech. It should be a big, serious technopark which supported startups activities. We created, we today have more like 1,000 company which selected from pipeline of more like 10,000 company. We would like to have our key partners from global industry. We already have it more like 40 company around the whole world and different area activities. We should to have money, of course, this venture capital source, and we would like to build a real city where the people can live and provide all social service. It's education, medical support, it's all activities, sport activities, cultural activities, and this. We are almost on the middle stage or middle point of our process, and we believe that this idea will be help to us to realize very ambitious plan in Russia. I would like to pay attention you for some critical elements what extremely important to us, and I believe they can be extremely important to resolve question what you already discussed. One is education. You already mentioned that issue. I think this is absolutely important part of any growing development our countries, and of course to thinking is the future. Our university, what we created, is a total model university, which will be one hand to try to serve the best students from almost from kindergarten, and to give them opportunity to realize all the potential what people can realize. At the same time, we would like to combine together on the university level research, education, and initial stage of entrepreneurial activities. If we will success and combine, we will be able to prepare a new kind of entrepreneur who will be able to realize any new idea to bring the product to market. Second one, what extremely important, this is IP issue. When we start to work with that problem, and I hope that we are today's audience of big IP fighting between the global company. But this problem has more deeper roots. The development country to try to limit access to basic knowledge, what in general is very dangerous. I think we should together, like in the platform like BRICS country and another country who support our initiative, to try to open all human knowledge, to give the equal rights to people to resolve the problem what they have in each country. The last one, what I would like to say, what we're capable to do to resolve the problems which increase the quality of life. This is directly linked with poverty problem. Which one? This is a big challenge with water, this is a challenge with clean tech, this alternative energy, and some the wide question with food supply. And in our center, we created some foresights. We have some state support. We bring initiative of private business, which together can be very active to resolve number of said problems and to give the result of that problems around the world. And last one, what I would like to say is our key principle, to be very open, to be very transparency, and to be very open for any kind of cooperation. I think this is absolutely critical. It's very dangerous today to be isolated, to try to build any artificial border. And I think it's idea to put all knowledge together and to fight with our human problem, what we really understand today. It's very important to be, again, to be together. And I would like to thank you, my Indian friends. We already have, through our foundation, number of very interesting projects together with India company, and I believe I use this opportunity to incentive maybe somebody from audience to welcome to Russia, to see what we're doing, and maybe to do something together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you for those comments and those welcoming words. I think in the interest of time, why don't we, rather than have a little more debate up here, why don't we open it up for questions? Okay, well, we'll do one question at a time. I think that's easier, so there's a direct answer. Why don't you, anyone passing the mic around here?
Yeah.
Right up here, the lady, the third row here. Yeah.
My compliments to Rajiv ji for highlighting the importance of small sector, because very few people talk about the potential of this sector. I have been attending several, forums. This is a solution not only for kind of putting India at a higher growth trajectory, but also your agenda of women empowerment, problem of migration, everything gets addressed if you go for small sector. and request to the policymakers here to, kind of give more importance to that. Now, sir, there is a worry which I often think about, and just if you could throw some light on that. Now, the way we are expecting some FDI to come to India, and apart from that, we ourselves are taking several initiatives to put more money in the economy. Don't you think that at some point of time this might lead to a problem of some overheating in the economy, which has been faced earlier by Southeast Asian countries, and perhaps China handled it very well? So if, as an economist, you think about it.
So you're saying that will this cause overheating? I think just there are a lot of questions. So
can
we just,
it? Yeah. So
okay.
if yes, then what do you think, what should be the effective strategy of India that we can adopt for? Thank you so much.
So, we are a capital short country, so FDI really should be welcome in this country from that perspective. However, there is investment and there is investment, there's capital and there's capital. Until we are actually a completely convertible currency, there is a certain prioritization of the type of capital you want to attract. So naturally, the tendency, normative, prescription is to try and attract long-term capital that is more strategic in nature, that brings with it other benefits other than just being capital, just being financial capital. So to attract that kind of capital, we have a lot more work to do. So the same prescription and work that we need to do to improve the business environment for small businesses will apply even to attract the type of capital we want from overseas.
All right. Why don't we do this again so that all the panel can participate? I'll maybe get 3 or 4 questions. And please just ask the question, if you don't mind. All right, the gentleman in the green kurta shirt.
Yeah, hi, my name is Anish, I'm from Bombay. My question is to Rajiv and to the friend from Russia. You mentioned about education, healthcare, transfer, etc. to address poverty. I think one of the most underappreciated and under-recognized tools to address poverty is skill development. And I think that we are doing some work on skill development on a mass scale. But I think we need much more of that, because it has a way of addressing. I'm fully in favor of the SME point that you mentioned, but I think skill development at the micro individual level, that's the fastest way to get people out of poverty, and that's something we've historically either not delivered on or not even understood or appreciated. Thanks.
So okay, the gentleman there on the suit, yeah.
In continuation to the earlier gentleman, Mr. Victor was mentioning about the success story of Russian origin. In my opinion, poverty eradication or poverty alleviation should be country specific and maybe the region specific and maybe the village specific. I'm just asking, why not we integrate from bottom up? We did it through ILO, that's why I'm saying. Why not we try to integrate from village and commune and region and state, and then map what kind of people are there, what kind of skills are required, and what kind of market is there today and in times to come. And then try to address the issue of poverty, which will then be sustainable. And no doubt Korea, Chinese examples are definitely good for everything, including research. But when it comes to policy making and policy deployment and policy implementation, I guess it needs to be country specific. Why not it be?
Okay. The lady there in the... Yes. Now, please, if we can just ask a question.
Just two very quick questions. One, Mr. Margarino spoke about economic growth must be inclusive. How does one sometimes do this without the government getting into a kind of interventionist mode, or getting into the wrong kind of redistribution in the name of making economic growth inclusive? And a question for Mr. Rajiv Lal. We've been talking about health and education, and it's always about spending. Why don't we focus more on how the money is spent and getting more bang for the spending buck?
Okay. We take one more question and then we'll start the answers. Yes, the gentleman there.
Can we talk about large scale and small scale and medium scale independently? For example, like if Maruti was not there, which is a large scale manufacturer, all the other ancillary industries and the support industries like the dealership and the service network and all those things, they would also not be there. So I think this whole particular thing, talking about what can be called, say, the industrial caste system, is really not going to take us anywhere. We just have to talk about development, and I think all these things, will take care of it.
Maybe we'll just maybe ask some of the questions for answer. So Carlos, the question to you really was about, you talked about inclusive growth. And the question really is that how can you have really inclusive growth without the government getting too interventionist? And what is your view on what inclusive growth actually means, and how should we do it in India?
It's an interesting question, and the answer will take more than the time we devoted to the panel. But I would say there is no country. Inclusiveness is important because in the long term it affects the growth rate. Statistically, academicians have demonstrated that there is a strong influence of inequality in the growth rate. Therefore, you have to extreme your tools, and you have to use your tools to the most you can to ensure a reduction of inequalities. That's what I meant by inclusiveness. Now, at the global level, how you do that? The main redistributive system you have at the global level is official development aid, which is the amount governments allot for technical cooperation funding programs all around the world. When you assess the improvement of official development aid, you see that the total percentage devoted to official development aid is still quite far from what was committed 15 years ago. It was said that it will reach 0.7 or 1% of the GDP of the countries, of the donor countries. And if you look at today, they are around 0.35 or 0.40 in total. This is not to say that they were not generous, because in the last year, official development aid increased some 60 or 70%, from 80 to $130 billion. And we have to consider that we have the financial crisis in the middle. So this official development aid helps to build those intangible assets in corners, remote corners of a global economy. Now, that's globally. You also have to use, to the extent possible, the tools you have, for example, in trade-related treaties. The last Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example, included one specific chapter for small and medium enterprises. I don't want to make any promotion of my writings, but this weekend I published an article in the G20 magazine precisely on this issue, giving a number of ideas on how you can use the available tools, including the environmental agreement to be negotiated next month in Paris, to ensure that you give access to small and medium enterprises and to reach the remote corners of the global economy. India recently met, for example, heads of state or government of African countries. More mechanisms to include them through preferential treatment in trade agreements or cooperation in the field of technology and innovation. We haven't talked about that, but this is something that maybe Vikram should talk, because he has been working on this issue quite a lot, on inclusive innovation, financing, and these sort of mechanisms. That's extremely important. Now, at local level, you also have to work a lot. When you look at the causes that help it reduce poverty at the national economies, you find few of them. One is the increase in the years of schooling. Rajiv referred to that. The second one is gender equality. Women work more, and to have a partner matter. That improves household incomes considerably. The third has been related to the decrease in the payment plus for specialization. That's not necessarily good in any economy, because the global economy is specialized. And we haven't talked here, for example, but ways and means we use in the last 15 years to build these intangible assets may change. I mean, we are building social capabilities through education and health and through other means. But probably we are preparing people today at school for jobs that will not exist in not 2 decades, 1 decade or 5 years. It is calculated that by 2020, for example, there will be some requests for positions that will not be provided by universities and vocational training of about 80 million job posts. And at the same time, there will be 90 million people offering skills in the job market that nobody will request because
Well,
it will be
let's
done by
talk.
robots.
I mean, I think one of the, just again I just got a note that we're running out of time, but I want to ask one comment from all of you, since it's come up in the theme over here, and you just mentioned it, is the whole issue of skill development, to really be focusing on developing skills which are relevant for the future. And the second is on the issue of importance of innovation to get the SME business and everything else going. Just some quick comments from the three of you on those two.
I just would like, I'm so sorry, maybe to reflect on the question about say, education and comments that it should be correct with some region specific. Yeah, and to yes and no. My idea, what you try to promote, is very important to give all children equal rights to access to basic information. It means today it's more easy to say to access to internet. If we will be give the all people, all children that opportunity, they will be open door the common knowledge. I think this is extremely important and links to question what you asked. Yeah.
On skill development, your views on that, or maybe you should, on the skill development piece, in terms of what's been happening in India.
So I think we have belatedly turned our attention to skill development. We need to fundamentally rehaul how we deliver education in this country. Somebody asked the question, I thought that was the point I was making, that it's not about how much we spend on education and public health, it's how we spend it. And what we are spending on education is terribly misspent. So increasing accent on vocational training, skill development, complete revamp of curricula, changing teachers' incentives, all of that requires to be done very, very fundamental reform, which we are not beginning to address because we are still focused on input, how much we are spending, rather than output, what we are getting for that spending.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to conclude in the sense that I think some of the themes that have come out from this, from the discussion really is the importance of small business, the importance of inclusive growth, the importance of getting the skills right, the importance of innovation and education. And I think that kind of pulling it all together and saying that the government, so you've got the right-wing view and the left-wing view, and the issue with subsidized spending or targeted spending is that you've got to be outcomes-focused rather than input-focused. And the issue with job creation is that you look at the history of any country, actually most jobs are never created in the large companies. They're created in the small businesses. And getting that right, I think, for us is imperative in terms of poverty alleviation. With that, I'd like to thank all the panelists. This is a topic which obviously you can have a 3-day conference on it rather than a 45-minute panel. But we appreciate your participation, appreciate the participation of the crowd and the questions, and thank you very much.